Chairman, Madam Chair, and Committee. My name is Representative Berkeley. I'm out of Southeast Boise District 18. Thank you for making accommodations so I can get up and speak before you. I'm back again, and I want to be clear up front. What is the bill that you have before you? I'm here to introduce RS 28734, but I want to provide some clarification first. The bill does not do the following. This bill does not make target picketing, residential picketing a misdemeanor. This bill does not limit where speech is to occur. This bill does not prevent someone from standing on someone's sidewalk, street, or adjacent house to express whatever their grievances they necessarily may have. What this bill is a compromise. The bill before you addresses the act of disclosing a person's address or other information identifying the specific location of the individual's residence or dwelling place. This is commonly known as doxing, for the intent to harass, intimidate, or cause another individual to engage in targeted residential picketing. This act has become more prevalent in our community, and unfortunately has played out this past summer on several occasions. Specifically, we saw Meridian police officers' residents publicly disseminated to encourage residential picketing outside his home. While we've navigated the discussions the last few weeks, there was a lot of communication from law enforcement spouses. I want to highlight one of those communication pieces. As a spouse of law enforcement, a lot of this really does touch close to home. Her name was Amber Abercrombie, and she expressed eloquently the struggles we as law enforcement spouses endured. As spouses and partners of officers, we too are required to sacrifice. We fear for our officers when they put on that badge and when they drive away. We worry endlessly about whether they're safe and pray that they're watched over as they selflessly serve. And we breathe a little sigh of relief when that open the door and they come back in from their long shift. To be asked to extend that worry even after they return home is unacceptable. Their homes and their families should be off limits. They protect and they serve. They see the harshest side and the ugliest side of humanity. And routinely, their mental health, and I can attest this, is taxed. When they shed their duty belts at the end of the day and walk up their weapons, they need to unwind at a place removed from the chaos of that shift. They need to be able to exhale the heaviness of the last 10 plus hours in a safe place, surrounded by their support system and their family. They need to reset. Domestic tranquility is a right, and it's a right afforded to each of us. The bill before you provides that extra level of protection from the increasing act of doxing that is becoming all too familiar. Currently, there is no statute on the book that addresses this very act. Several other states have passed similar legislation. Most notably, the Utah legislature recently passed the same language that is encompassed actually within this bill. In addition to that, Washington, New Jersey, Colorado, Massachusetts, Connecticut have all passed similar or have similar statutes on the book. Target picketing is defined within this bill. However, there is no associated penalty applied for the act of picketing outside one's house. We are addressing the act of intentionally disseminating someone's personal identifying information for the very purpose of harassing and intimidating them. Sheriff Donahue highlighted it best. Legislative officials, law enforcement, we sign on to this work as well, we all know, but the families and the spouses that are home alone at their house become the target. The Fraternal Order of Police, the Chief of Police Association, Sheriff's Association, as well as the prosecutors all support this because they recognize that the threat can unveil itself to the officer's family for simply doing their job. It will become difficult to keep good people in these careers. Their families become victims of this type of behavior. This intimidation is not victimless. The children and spouses, we become captive in our homes. While I recognize this legislation isn't perfect, rather many of us, we don't believe it goes far enough. Well, that's the reality of crafting laws. They're never perfect. But one thing is certain, we did have that discussion. The rich and purposeful discussion about fairness, civil discourse, First Amendment rights, our families, our homes, how we need to protect them. This discussion wasn't one-sided. We heard from people who were deeply hurt by the events of this past year, And we heard from both sides that say we haven't gone far enough, or maybe we went too far. But one thing is certain, this past year gave us a lot to reflect. This legislation doesn't achieve what I wanted, what necessarily our partner agencies wanted, but it does achieve one additional level of security for our families, for our law enforcement officers, for our businesses. As I have mentioned, this legislation is supported by all law enforcement associations throughout Idaho. And I'm asking your support in helping us pass this meaningful legislation to continue and to address the very privacy of protecting our homes and our families from this unfortunate turn of events and this unfortunate behavior and acts that are probably all too familiar within society. With that, I will stand for any questions, and that concludes my introduction.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Green, I have a question. I think you made part of it clear in your opening, but this does not make targeted picketing illegal. But I do have two questions as a follow-up to that. Number one, the definition of targeted residential picketing uses the word picketing to define it. So I have a question about that, and I'll save my other for all of them.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Representative Tate. No, there is no penalty that is specified or stipulated within the document in front of you. The definition of target picketing is in here because we mention it as an act or an intent that will follow should you disseminate somebody's personal identifying information. But residential target picketing is defined as a reference, and there is no penalty. We've heard loud and clear that the behavior of being able to picket out front of someone's home is many people believe a right afforded to them, and we have taken the special steps to address that with this revised legislation in front of you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Green. Then my question becomes in paragraph 1. This is what's commonly known as doxing, that revealing people's private information. The problem I have with this is in those 5 lines, it says, it's unlawful to publish, post, disseminate, or disclose an individual's residential address or other information to identifying the specific location of an individual's residence or dwelling place with the intent to harass, intimidate, or cause another individual to engage in targeted residential picketing. Taking off that last clause after the comma, the prior stuff should make sense. Is it possible to disclose someone's address with the intent to harass? I'm having trouble understanding what it means to disclose somebody's address with the intent to harass or intimidate.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Representative, I'm going to go ahead and use an example in hopes that maybe that will help answer your question. So this past year, there was 2 incidents. The first incident was a police officer, and when he made the arrest, there were a lot of people who felt that his arrest maybe not necessarily been constitutional. So someone had gone online, had taken his address, posted out there for public consumption, said, we're going to meet at this location, we're going to protest this officer's behavior. So the very act of putting that information out there for the intention to harass or intimidate, several of us understand what that feels like, and that is the intent. On the flip side, the gal who was arrested, and many people felt that her arrest was unconstitutional, someone else went, took her address, posted and disseminated it online and said, we're all going to congregate, we're going to go and protest that woman's who was arrested, as her behavior apparently they thought was not appropriate. The act of putting that information out there to encourage people to assemble in front of that person's house for the intention to intimidate or harass, which is something we all can understand what that feels like, is what we're looking to address. It's the act of disseminating it for the very purpose for somebody to feel trapped or uncomfortable in their home as a result of that behavior. So this really does take care of everyone across the board. It's the dissemination of information for the very purpose to intimidate, harass, or result in target picketing.
Madam Chair, one more follow-up. Madam Chair, Representative Green, so if I'm upset with a public official or officer or anyone who I want to go and just demonstrate in front of their house. If I mention to my wife, hey, I'm going here, it's on 123 Main Street, meet me there, I've just violated this law.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Representative. It would have to be actually prosecutable before our prosecutors or law enforcement are going to pursue it. So they need an abundance of information, an abundance of evidence that you actually had done that. What was obvious and what we've seen several times, and you guys just recently, a couple of weeks ago, the act of putting somebody's address and a time and location for the very purpose of showing up and picketing their house was the act that we're trying to address. So through side conversation, that is not going to be enough for a prosecutor or sheriff or a law enforcement officer to actually prosecute for that. But it was clear the behaviors that we saw unfold this past year in several occasions, they can look back at that and say, yes, there's enough evidence that is presented to us, we feel comfortable in making that arrest or making that citation, and therefore taking it to court. That's the case with almost all laws in the book. You need an abundance of evidence to be able to prosecute, or they're not going to pursue it. So while we recognize the act of people showing up on their doorsteps and pulling them all together and ticketing them because they're physically there might be a little easier to discern, this is a abundance of evidence that will be necessary for a prosecutor, sheriff, or a law enforcement officer to feel that they can actually cite with that misdemeanor.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Representative Green, can you just clarify, so it is legal to go picket in front of someone's house or protest in front of someone's house currently and would be with this law still? Is that correct?
Madam Chair and Representative Scott, it is not illegal in the state of Ohio currently to go and picket in front of someone's home. This law does not change that.
Okay, thank you. So I'm having problems with how this is written then, because if I have a problem with Representative Nate and I want to go picket his house or get my friends and say he voted poorly and we need to at least let him know we're aware of this. And so I go to my Facebook and say, show up at 123 Main Street, let's go picket and show him how we feel about this. And so I put that out there. My intent is to just picket and show him we disagree with his vote. And so how does a police officer know your intent? And if you put that out there, and let's just say some bad actors show up and cause a problem, but I put the address out, am I responsible for their bad behavior then?
Madam Chair and Representative Scott, the act of taking Representative Nate's address, posting it on Facebook for the very intention of intimidating, harassing, or target picketing, that act would be considered a misdemeanor according to this. Now, should somebody show up and they disrupt the tranquility of that home at whatever level, whatever laws are on the books would be the ones to address that. But the act of doxing somebody's information for the very purpose of intimidation or harassment or target picketing would constitute a misdemeanor according to this.
Quick follow-up. Thank you, Madam Chair, Representative Reed. So how would I let people know where we're going to go do our protest? Because it's gonna be illegal now, correct?
Madam Chair, Representative Scott, you can communicate in a means that you feel comfortable, but should you disseminate that information publicly for the very intentions outlined within the stipulated lines within this, then that would constitute a misdemeanor. The act of picketing out front of somebody's house is not, under any circumstances, under current law, a misdemeanor, or there's other fraction associated with that.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. I was just going to object to Representative Scott's, that if she were to picket Representative Nate's house, because I think it's a lot more likely that I would picket. But I probably.
Point duly noted. Representative Crosby.
Madam Chairman, for a motion,
Go ahead.
I move to introduce RS 28734.
There's been a motion on the table to introduce RS 28734. Discussion?
Madam Chair, I still have a question
Yeah,
for Representative Green, if I may.
yes.
So, all of the emotions and the scenarios aside, I would just like to drill down on what we're doing definitionally here in this piece of legislation. So, we have a definition for targeted residential picketing. And the verbs that I see here that define targeted residential picketing are engaging in, actually engaging is the verb, so we're engaging in picketing or other demonstration. I still don't know what picketing is. There's no legal definition of picketing anywhere that I'm aware of in state code. And if there was, the terms other demonstration would still leave this incredibly vague. So I'm not sure how I know what targeted residential picketing is. Can you point me to some language or definition somewhere in state code that would clear that up for me?
Madam Chair and Representative Young, the definition that you see in front of us is the definition that we are putting into state code. Currently, there is no definition of picketing as it pertains to current statutes. The language that we are using that's within this statute in front of you is the exact same language that we have taken from the Arizona statute that's been on the books since 1995, and that has been upheld. So we are pretty comfortable and confident with what's put in front of you as being what it is constitutional. Again, I do want to reiterate, you can picket in front of somebody's house as much as you want. That is not what we're citing here. We are citing the very act of doxing somebody's information for the very purpose of harassment, intimidation, or picketing their home.
Madam Chair, if I may, I didn't really hear the answer to my question. May I try again? Thank you, Madam Chair. What I am looking for is a definition of picketing, because you can't define picketing by saying it's picketing without defining picketing.
Madam Chair.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
the way a court would look at that is they just look at the dictionary definition of picketing. We don't have to define everything. If it isn't defined in code, then a court will just look to the dictionary definition of picketing if it needs assistance. So I hate to get caught or wrapped around the axle on this.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Marshall.
Well, I was just going to help clarify that. The definition of picketing in the dictionary, and I agree totally with Representative Trupke on this. We don't define everything in code. When it's a common word that's used and it's definable, and so a person or group of people standing outside a place of work or whether a venue protesting something or trying to persuade, that's picketing. And it's pretty straightforward.
Thank you. Representative Kirby.
Yeah, Madam Chair, for a substitute motion.
Go ahead.
So, Madam Chair, I move to send this RS to the floor for the second reading calendar. I'd like to explain my motion.
Please, go ahead.
Yeah, so this is a good discussion, but I think to be fair to this is a pretty well-known issue. This is a redone deal. And I think it deserves a discussion on the floor. And if we don't get it to the floor today, if we don't send it up there, it has no chance of making it up there by the transmission date. So not sending it to the floor a day is effectively killing the bill. So I just think there's a lot of discussion here, and that would be a great discussion to have on the floor. And then it makes it our guys up there, with everyone having a shot at it, and a good discussion. And we kind of finished the discussion we didn't quite have on the floor after getting, 150 emails or whatever.
Thank you. Representative Scott.
Madam Chair, just a question. Representative Green, I'm curious, so this, I know everything for Boise, I license through the city, but let's just say I have a piece of property and it borders state land or Forest Service land. And I have picketers outside that decide they wanna line my property. Am I gonna be covered under this? Because it says, what does it say here? In front of, let's see, in front of, on the street or sidewalk in front of a person's residence or dwelling place, or in the street or sidewalk in front of the adjacent resident or dwelling place. Now, I've got a lot of open space and not a lot of zero sidewalks and one main road, but I'm off the road, so what does that look like? Would I be covered under this?
Madam Chair and Representative Scott, I know we can go down several hypotheticals as we try to discern what is protected or not. Apparently, my initial reaction or response to that would be, you're covered. If anybody were to go picket on your property or the adjacent property, they have the right, not on your property, but they have the right to certainly picket out in front of your property or the adjacent property, or however on the private forest lands. The act of then disseminating your address to get people to assemble in front of your property, that act is what we consider doxing, and that would make a misdemeanor.
Follow up. Thank you, Madam Chair and Representative Green. So could they say, show up at Forest Service spot, campground, this, could they give the address right next to mine? And but they're picketing me, would it cover it? Would this language cover it?
Madam Chair and Representative Scott, that would be something I'd have to look into.
Representative McCroskey.
Madam Chair, I didn't want to jump in line ahead of Representatives Nate or Young, but I just want to say that I support the substitute motion. I'm going to leave my underlying motion out there in case that doesn't pass, but I think it's a good one.
Representative Young.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would appreciate maybe some additional clarification too in this definition. And you may remember I was a no on this language the first time because of definitional problems in part. So with the idea in mind that this isn't just a statute that applies to elected officials or police officers, that this statute is a blanket statute that applies to every Idahoan equally. I see the term person a couple of times here. And it's illegal to picket or otherwise demonstrate in front of a person's home for the purpose of, with intent to harass, annoy, or alarm another person. But to me, that language almost indicates that the person whose home you are in front of is not necessarily the person that you annoy or alarm. Can you help resolve that for me?
Madam Chair and Representative, I'm not exactly sure how to give the appropriate response. Certainly, we took this language and mimicked it off of already existing state statutes for that reason. That has been upheld. Person being what we were suggested as the party in which we're trying to protect from this egregious behavior. Certainly, if you're out picketing in front of somebody's home, you're also disturbing probably their neighbors. You're disturbing everybody in the neighborhood. Although, back to the intent of what is in front of you, the intent of this, what we're putting forward as your RS, is not to criminalize the behavior of picketing. It is to address the behavior of doxing somebody's personal identifying information for the very purpose to intimidate and to harass or target picketing. And should you show up and assemble in front of somebody's home, that is still legal in the state of Idaho. And when this passes, will still be legal once this passes.
Thank you. Representative Blake.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Question?
I'm speaking to the motion, the substitute motion. And I would oppose the substitute motion and oppose the main motion because I think this bill has, or this proposed RS has serious problems. It is not the same as we've already hashed. The prior one, as the good sponsor indicated, was about targeted picketing. This is not about targeted picketing. This is apparently about organizing targeted picketing and organizing assembly and speech. And it seems to me to be touching two First Amendment issues and causing constraints on both of those. The idea of publishing, posting, or disseminating sounds reasonable, but then or disclose an individual's. Disclosing could mean me mentioning it to somebody or saying it to someone, saying, hey, we're going to go and picket, which is something totally legal apparently now. We can go and picket somebody's house. They say, oh great, where? And if I say the address, I violated this law because that's disclosing. It's not just publishing, as it states, it's also disclosing. Also, beyond that, too, is that what if I disclose that address, not with the intent to harass or intimidate, but to just organize a picketing? Well, when that picketing happens, then the officer has to determine whether it qualifies as targeted picketing and whether or not my disclosure of that address caused that to happen. And targeted picketing, apparently from this, rests on the intent of the individuals. The disclosure language also rests on my intent to disclose, to harm, harass, annoy, harass, or cause targeted picketing. So this is almost legislating an intent of an intent. And I don't even know how we get the first intent determined in law, let alone an intent of an intent. So I have real problems with this, and so I would say, you know, I'm against both motions, and I'll be voting that way. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think the definitions in here are sufficiently clear that any reasonable person who has a legal mind or an unlegal mind can understand it. I don't have any problem with the definitions that are here. We can nitpick definitions incessantly, but these definitions are sufficiently clear. There's another broader issue here that all of this has raised. Our First Amendment rights are not absolute. We've always understood that First Amendment rights, the right to speech, the right to assemble, they all have certain limits to them. We can't slander people, and we can't threaten personal harm or assault people in that way. That's not part of our right to speech. I think it's wrong, just flat out wrong, to picket in front of a residential home. It's wrong, and people should know it's wrong. And people shouldn't do it. They just shouldn't do it because it's wrong. In our society, if we want to be free, most restraint on our behavior has to be self-imposed. If that restraint is not self-imposed, then we're going to ask government to pass more and more law and more law until the laws become numerous and oppressive, and none of us want that. But there has to be a balance here. Freedom requires a balance, and it requires restraint. Picketing in front of a residential property is wrong, and it ought not to be. Now, if the people of this state insist on their right to picket in front of a residential home, then we'll have to make it wrong in statute. That's what we'll have to do. I hope that the people of this state would be wise enough to know it's just flat out wrong. It is not protected speech. It is not protected right to assemble, to harass people in that sacred space of their property and their home. That is not right. They can come down here and picket all they want. They can come to any public meeting and picket all they want. But they do not have the right, under speech and assembly, to come and harass me in that sacred space that is my home. The Third and Fourth Amendment to the Constitution of the United States enshrines a certain right of privacy in our homes, our persons, fence. So I think that's a broader issue. And I wish everybody in the sound of my voice would listen. If you persist on doing things that are inherently wrong, although not illegal, then eventually the state will have to make them illegal. If that's what you want to just have us force us, if you just want to force us to keep making, if you want to force us to keep making laws because we have to say to some people, that's wrong, then that's what we'll have to do. I'll vote for the motion to send it to the second reading.
Representative Phillips.
Madam Chair, amen to that.
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have concerns sending this to the second reading. I do think it is a really hot topic. I think what we discussed before is not exactly the same issue. To disclose information is different than picketing. And if we're not really having the picketing thing, we're talking about disclosing information. And it is a First Amendment right, and I think it's something that's worthy to look into. And that's why I will not be supporting to send this to the second reading. I don't know how I feel exactly on the bill itself. I do think the language is vague once again, and it needs some cleanup, but to just not have a hearing on such a controversial bill that has already caused so much conflict with citizens and with the chairman, I just think it would be worth doing a hearing and actually hearing both sides on this issue.
Representative Cannons, how many times, do you have a lot that you want to add to this
Do I have
topic?
a lot? Are you asking me?
No, I'm asking the two behind you, but I do want you to speak first, Representative Cannon. I'm just looking at the clock. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will be supporting the substitute motion made by Representative Kirby. I want to speak to the intent element of this proposed legislation and indicate that this is not unique. If you were to study Title 18 of the Idaho Code, which sets forth a majority of the crimes that are defined in Idaho, you would find that title replete with laws that have a certain intent element to them. And most of them are very difficult to determine, and that's just the nature of the criminal law system in America. In law school, we learn that a crime is an act or an actus reus,